It's really wonderful to be able to present this today to all our young professionals, a part of the Investec family as well. It's a great opportunity to really speak about all the things that need to be considered when entering the working world, and all the things that need to be considered along that journey too. And your first few years of work can feel like you've been dropped in a strange jungle. It can feel like an episode of Survivor or a new challenge on PlayStation. I mean, we don't know all the unspoken rules, and even though the nuances may shift from industry to industry, the basic challenges stay the same. That's why it's exciting to have an audience made up of young actuaries, attorneys, chartered accountants, and medical professionals. And we're excited to have Koshiek Karan with us today. And whether you're new hires or veterans of a few years, I know his insights will be invaluable. So, Koshiek, X really does mark the spot for us today. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining. You've been in the thick of the jungle, so to speak, and your path has been similar in many ways to many of the audience. And you hold your honors degree in finance. You worked in investment banking for 9 years, and you must know how challenging this can be. And people know you from Twitter or your web platform, Banker X, as you engage with young South Africans on social every day. And social media itself, in fact, Twitter can be a bit of a blood sport sometimes, eh?
Mops, it is wild out there. You know, Twitter is a dark place sometimes, right? And listen, thank you so much for having me. It's really good to be here.
Now, it's awesome to have you on Investec Curveball. I actually was really excited to have you last week, and then unfortunately you ended up getting some symptoms, and unfortunately you came down with COVID. Is everything okay now? You feeling better?
Yeah, look, I think COVID's trailing, and it seems to be, you know, the flavor of the day. I just really didn't want to be left out, so I figured, you know, I'd just get myself the full experience.
You couldn't have answered that in a more Koshiek Karan way. Listen, Koshiek, let's get right into it. Why is this discussion so important, and why now?
Okay, let's get down to business, Mops. I mean, you know, interacting with young professionals every single day, you realize just how much incredible talent there is out there. And, you know, there's so many things we wish we knew when we started out, and we wish there was just someone out there looking out for us. And, you know, young professionals, especially right now, they've overcome so many challenges, getting your degree, scoring jobs during this pandemonium. And I know many people feel isolated, and I know it feels really tough right now. So that's why it's a perfect time, Mops, for you and I to have this conversation.
Well, let's actually get right into that first topic that we really want to look at. And we want to touch on the payslip. Say you're a young professional, you get offered a job with a cost to company salary or gross of 600K. I mean, that's R500,000 right there. I mean, talk us through a typical payslip, and how much are we really getting paid? Because people kind of miss that quite often.
Mops, you said 600K, and I'm sure many of our webcast viewers are thinking right now, M4, Cabs Bay apartment, Gucci suits. But let's carve it up, right? 600K is 50K a month.
Yeah.
After tax, it's about 37, 38K. You've got a medical aid, your pension fund, UIF. Now you take your 30K. So now you have to pay for your car, your apartment. Suddenly you're under 20K a month, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to just look at the holistic picture whenever you get a salary slip.
But I mean, look, when you're looking at that holistic picture, is it that easy to kind of really recognize, you know, what that looks like and how to manage that? Because even getting that immediately is a bit of a shock from, you know, coming out of university and going straight into the working world. I mean, it's quite important to have a full idea of what that's all about. And as a young professional, it's that starting point. How does one negotiate that salary without shooting yourself in the foot and end up losing the offer?
So here's the thing, Mops. I mean, when it comes down to salaries, and, you know, it's important we have a really open discussion about this. Information is power, right? and speak to everyone that you can speak to. Collect every shrapnel of data, go through salary surveys, speak to friends, families. I mean, when you have conversations sometimes, Mops, you run a very successful restaurant. I mean, you can ask someone, hey, how much can I expect to make as a restaurant manager? And they'll tell you, Mops, when I started my restaurant in 1874, I got paid R3.50 and I made it stretch. And kids of today can't manage their money. And it's very important to also look at the perspectives of how inflation has changed salaries. And when you're benchmarking that in a professional designation, if you're a doctor, chartered accountant, or lawyer doing the articles, the amount that you earn today simply can't be what people were earning 5 or 10 years ago, right? And it's so important to drive hard for a decent salary up front because, Bobs, when you start out with a low salary, it takes a long time to get out of the hole. And yes, you are just being paid on potential. It takes a long time before you start adding value to a firm. But remember that you are valuable. You deserve to be there at that firm. And you are worth every single cent that they're going to pay you now and they're going to pay you in the future.
Absolutely. But then you have the other kind of challenges, which is the fact that I know many people on the webcast are dealing with the burden of student debts, and some are looking to buy a new pair of wheels while they're trying to pay off those student debts. And many people finding themselves supporting their family and extended family. So it's a bit of a balancing act, isn't it?
100%. Look, many people on the webcast have family commitments. You're looking after elderly relatives, you buy groceries for folks back home. And also, like many people on the webcast, I'm the first person in my family to go to university. So you understand that pressure that comes with being the first person to do anything, within your community, within your family, within your social structure. And it also comes with this heavy pressure, right? And pressure is not often spoken about as a counterpoint to your achievements. I think culturally, many times it's very difficult to have that conversation with people. Money is taboo, right? And if you don't have those conversations up front, Mops, with your family, with your dependents about what you can shoulder, ultimately you end up taking on far too much insurmountable strain on yourself. And if you can't take care of yourself, Mops, you can't take care of anyone.
Absolutely. And I mean, that is really the premise of it all, but it still isn't that easy to be able to budget. So how does a young professional build a budget for all these kinds of commitments?
That's a good question. I mean, look, personally, I spend 100% of what I earn. So, budget for me is a guideline, Mops. It's a target of how much I can spend in a month.
How do you actually budget, Koshiek?
Okay, look, let's be serious. One way to really do it that's really useful is called the 50-30-20 rule, right? 50%, 30%, 20%. So basically how this works is you take your salary after tax. You spend 50% on your needs, 30% on your wants, and 20% repay debt and saving, right? Now, this is where it gets tricky, boss, because you can turn around and for you, a trip to Bali and, a new Prada suit is a need. It's not a need, right? That 50% is what you need to survive. It's your rent, your healthcare, your food, your transport. And listen, Bob, I think you have a great sense of style, but you don't need that cashmere jersey to survive, right? That's not your 50%. Yeah. The 30%, that's all your fun stuff.
Koshiek, I don't know who you think I am.
No, I think we're using you as an example here, right?
Yeah.
The 30%, that's all the fun stuff. Eating out, the movies, new pair of kicks, concert tickets. That's the 30% that gives you a reason to live, right? And that 30% can quickly become 40 or 50% if you're not disciplined about it. Now let's talk about the 20%. The 20% is your emergency fund, paying down debt, your stock portfolio, all of the cash that you are putting down today to buy yourself freedom and flexibility and agility in the future. Now, when you're starting out, you might say, well, KK, 50% isn't enough for me, or 20% isn't enough to pay down my debt because I'm just starting my career. I've got to get a car. I've got to get a new pad. I've got to get all of these things. So it's important to be flexible and dial it up. but make sure that if you're doing 60, 30, 10, 50, 30, 20, that you actually have a grip on those percentages.
Yeah.
And the last thing to say on this, Bobs, why it's so important is that 3/4 of South Africans are broke by the middle of the month. And you really don't want to be in a situation where you have more month at the end of your money than money at the end of the month, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's probably the challenge. But I think 50, 30, 20 is a pretty good piece of advice to really consider. And there's also something there around, once you start having debit orders, perhaps, to put those towards the front as well, picking those right dates so that you actually don't deceive yourself into thinking you have a little bit more later on. That can help with your budget as well. Sorry, just something I remember learning very early on where you kind of go through it and then there was nothing left. But that also forced me to kind of personally diversify and have, kind of different streams of income. And that isn't always easy for people. And relying on one income or job may not be enough. And we saw this during the pandemic that we're in right now. It can definitely be lost overnight, and it even may lead to unexpected budgeting expenses, like paying 850 Rand for a COVID test, which you had to go for last week, or helping out a family member. How does one diversify that income stream? Because that also isn't something that everyone really particularly knows how to do or will actually end up being able to do.
Pops, I think before I dive into side hustles, you mentioned debit orders. Now, you have Netflix, Spotify, Apple Music. Those debit orders hit you like a thief in the night.
Yeah.
And you wake up in the morning and you're like, wow, $30. $30 I didn't even know I had. It's gone, right? And, that ties in nicely to our conversation around diversifying your income stream. And I think it's safe to say every single person on this webcast knows someone that was personally affected by losing their job or their income over this pandemic, right? And, job security is not just fragile, Bobs. In this market, is non-existent. There's no industry that's immune to job losses, pay cuts, retrenchments, restructures. And I think, having the luxury of a full-time monthly salary while being able to build out a side hustle, it's something that's completely underrated. Many people make it seem like a binary decision. Go out, start a business, or do a 9-to-5. But you can make such incredible progress having your 9-to-5 and still managing to finance your side hustle, right? So where do you start, Mops? I mean, what are the skills you have and how do you package it, right? I think everything can be sold. I mean, Mops, if you had to bottle your bath water, I'm sure, we could sell a couple of bottles of that, right? Maybe that's the side hustle idea for you.
Maybe not during a pandemic, Koshiek.
This is a terrible idea. You're right. Let's kill that. I'll get back with more ideas for you. But, you speak about side hustles and you look at Robinhood traders and OnlyFans, content creators, sponsored podcasts, freelance gigs. These platforms exist now that didn't exist 10, 20 years ago. So the platforms are there. The question is, how do you get yourself online? How do you market your talents? How do you market your skills? And, the most important thing, Bobs, is to do the search. You build up an emergency fund and protect yourself against things that we're seeing now. And if you had to look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, could I survive if the taps were turned off for the next month, 2 months, 3 months? That's probably the most important question to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question for me I've asked for a long time is something around credit. I feel like the way that credit is set up a lot of the time is the antithesis of how we learn to use money. Of course, it's supposed to teach that, but it's always been an interesting thing of how you would need to get into kind of overusage of money to be able to be deemed someone who is able to use credit and be able to pay it back. And let's tackle that issue. Credit loans, credit scores. What do people think about when it comes to borrowing money?
Here's the thing. You open the newspaper, you drive down the street, you see a billboard and it says, here's a loan, 2% interest a month. Now that sounds low. I mean, 2% is nothing, right? And then Mops, you'll stand in the city and next thing some guy comes over to break your legs, right? And he's like, pay me back. And you just realize, wait, what have I got myself into? And it raises such an important point. Qualifying and affordability are two completely different things. Just because you qualify for credit, just because you qualify for an X5, just because you qualify for a Cabs Bay mansion, it really doesn't mean that you can afford it month to month and live comfortably. So look, don't go out there buying don't buy cars, houses, gifts on your future income, because all of that stuff's not guaranteed, right? And especially on your first job, Mops, some guy phones you up, he offers you a G-Wagon with a balloon payment of 80%. And you're like, you know what? This is going to be good for me to flex on the gram. The worst thing you can do. Right? Give that car back. Maybe take it for a weekend. Maybe 2 weekends. But give it back. Right? Because it's so easy for us to get ourselves into debt. And once you get into that hole, it can end up being a generational curse. That's how bad it is. You don't want your kids paying for your bad decisions today.
Absolutely, and I mean, even taking it off the onset, if you kind of don't read that fine line, you might not be able to give it back itself. So that's nothing altogether. But I've learned my lesson the hard way as well around spending money initially that you are expecting to come, but that also isn't always the case. And it's important that you spend money that is in your account for sure. And you mentioned Instagram earlier, and it also raises that kind of question. I mean, we look at Instagram, those feeds are on fire. I mean, you've got people who wear designer clothes, everything is perfect, and at least there's an illusion of perfection and wealth, even in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, how are people even funding these lifestyles? I mean, I know no one wants to miss out, but how do you live within your means? Is there even a balance when it comes to that?
Bobs, I mean, you're in the entertainment business, and Instagram can be a beautiful place, right? There's yachts and private jets and thirst traps and everything that makes you want to spend a lot of time on social media. But listen, we buy things we don't need to impress people we don't like with money we don't have, right? That's one of my favorite quotes. And the truth is, we're locked in this instantaneous gratification culture. It's a toxic loop. We're competing against each other using credit. It's all artificial. Most of it is. And I think every material item that you saw on Instagram came with a credit score or a person's overall financial health or the payslip. Social media would be a very different story, Bobs, right? You can't flex with that Hermes bag when you 400K in credit, right? It feels different. And listen, I'm all for people enjoying their hard-earned money. And I think life's short, you got to enjoy it. But, you got to ask yourself why you're doing it and who you're doing it for, right? Are you buying this item for the validation of other people? Can it get you into trouble? And I think, Bobs, you and I had a conversation this week offline around, one of the posts I think we saw on social media. I think you can elaborate on that, where, people get disappointed where they don't get enough likes or retweets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, earlier on social media this week, and I'm sure you'd have seen it too. It's you start to think of who are you actually living for? What's informing your decisions, and how we put all this pressure on ourselves, in the zeitgeist that we find ourselves in. Because I saw this tweet with a guy who had 4 pictures of him walking around this new place, and in each picture he's holding the keys of this new home. And a couple, hours later, he's like, "Oh, you guys were going crazy about this person's views on renting instead of buying, but I just bought and I just got so few interactions. I mean, do you guys even know what you want?" And it's like, do you just buy a house so that you could get interactions? That just doesn't make sense. How do we get ourselves to this point?
I know look, it's good that we are having open conversations, because everybody's in the situation, but no one talks about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's something we could talk about for ages as well. But let's move on to our next topic or theme. And I mean, day one at work can be a shock, a reality check. You've been a star achiever at varsity. You had all these amazing leadership roles. Now you land your first job, and suddenly you're the most junior person in the room. And that can be pretty hard to deal with, right, Koshiek?
100%, Mops. I mean, corporates are inherently a pyramid structure. Now, you go from being a top achiever, as you said. I mean, you're waking up at 11 a.m., attending 3-4 lectures, having an afternoon beer, enjoying the student life. And all of a sudden, you find yourself sitting in a corporate building where the lights are always on, 24/7. You're standing in front of a printer, photocopying your line manager's kid's coloring book at 11 p.m. And you're wondering, what the hell have I done in my life to get here, right?
Yeah.
And it's a culture shock. It's a massive shock for everyone getting onto their first job. But I think the important thing is to be able to read those social cues, right? Understand people, observe people, and just always remember you belong in that environment and you're there for a reason. And you belong in that corporate and that workplace as much as anybody else does, irrespective of how junior you are, right? Your ideas matter, your thoughts matter, your perspectives count. And everything's going to be awkward, Bobs. You know, you're going to meet people and 30 seconds later, you're going to forget their name and just be like, oh, the lady with the red hair. Oh, now you got to figure out, you got to ask someone else, excuse me, what is her name? And it just gets so awkward. But remember something, there is such thing as a stupid question, right? People make you believe that it's not. But listen, after a year, if you're asking the most basic things out there, it doesn't reflect well on you. Absolutely. But the counterpoint to that, Mops, is ask all of the stupid questions early. Get it out the way. Ask everything that's completely insane, utterly ridiculous. Ask it in those first month, 2 months, 3 months of work, because nobody's going to judge you for it. There's no stigma attached to it.
Well on you.
Exactly. And it actually reflects well on you that, you know what, this person is asking even the most basic things. So many people are afraid to ask those questions early on. And, you know, it comes back to bite them a couple of months down the line.
So what I hear you saying is that you have to have skills, or you don't have to have skills, or I beg your pardon, you have to have skills that they didn't teach you in academic environment, but you need to be able to also roll with it. I mean, do you feel like it's good to be able to roll with it? And how important are skills versus knowledge, essentially?
You know, I think that's such an important question, Mouse, because, you know, there's two ways of establishing your dominance in your first day of work. I mean, you can take the prison approach. You know, that's go into the CEO's office, sit on his chair and say, you know, I'm the captain now, right? But you'll probably last 3 hours and you're going to be unemployed pretty soon. So maybe don't do that. Yeah. But what's a better way of doing it, of developing those hidden skills? You know, people don't leave organizations, they leave bad managers. And oftentimes it's more important to be a person that people want to be around than what you actually know. And the converse is true. Sometimes you can be the most technically gifted, smartest person out there. But if people don't want to be around you, Mops, your career is going to be limited very heavily because people are going to use you for those skills and abilities, but it's really going to suffocate your upward trajectory in the organization. So look, best thing you can do is sometimes you just got to let people know you exist. And in the past, and you know, drawing on my investment banking experience, in the past, working 16, 18 hours a day is a badge of honor. It looks like you're a hard worker, you're in the trenches, this man's a soldier. But you know what? It actually reflects terribly on you. It tells everyone that you can't manage your time, you're inefficient, and worse, you don't have a life outside of work.
Yeah.
So, you know, the culture of FaceTiming, of putting in the hours of what we thought was success 30, 50, even 5 years ago, it's changed. It's very different now.
Absolutely. It's far more testing and pressure times. And before I actually go into an example, I want to speak about that. I felt like when you said, you know, going into the office and sitting on your boss's desk, I felt like there was going to be a banner that came up said the views shared in this webcast are that of Koshiek Karan.
Please don't do it. Please don't make it a meme. Please don't make it go viral. I promise you. Like, guys, don't. Don't take your boss's office. It's better to drive his car, you know, if you can.
Okay. Koshiek, stop. But no, you speak about working hard and how, you know, working yourself right down to the bone used to be this thing that is, you know, seen as cool, but it's such an old way of thinking. It's more damaging. You need to find that balance. And, you know, you see the effect of that in cultures of places like Japan. You know, people just... it's an amazing society, but one of the biggest issues they have is the mental issues that come with just overworking. It's actually called formally overwork.
That's a great point you make, Mouse, because there's a difference between a job, a career, and a calling, right? Yeah. And I think most people never get to the point where they discover what they were put on earth to do. And, you know, if you're second guessing your career, it's a healthy place to be because millennials and Gen Z employees, they don't spend a lot of time in roles. You know, it's a far cry from when people spend like 30 years in an organization. I think we've got to be honest with ourselves. And there's so much more to life than spending 2 hours in traffic, sitting in useless meetings, listening to stories about Karen's cats or her kids or, stuff that you really don't care about. Let's be honest.
That's
and poor Karen. But arguably, a corporate environment is some of the best places to start a career because you develop these technical skills, you build up these relationships, you work on these high-profile deals, and you just got to appreciate that you can get to a point very quickly where the trade-off doesn't make sense. All right. In your first couple of years, it makes sense. But after 10 years, 15 years, maybe even 5 years, that time that you spend with family, the time you spend at the gym, the time you spend socializing with friends, catching up on Netflix, reading a book, that starts to become more and more expensive and more valuable to you than sitting out here and sending out emails. So the most important thing. Sorry, Bob, go for it.
Sorry, this is the trade-off of your overall happiness and finding balance versus chasing the highest possible salary.
100%, Mobs. And you think about it, and you're a corporate athlete, and you expected, sports athletes are lucky to have a career that's more than 5 years in some sports. You're expected to have a career for 35, 40 years. So how do you position yourself so you don't end up burnt out by 30, right? And, use the example of Cristiano Ronaldo, over his career, how he's not as fast as he was when he was a 17-year-old player, but he's adapted his game. He's become more tactical. He's improved his heading, his positioning, his leadership abilities. And that's exactly what you've got to do as a corporate athlete. How do you position yourself to give 100%, but also make sure those skill sets evolve over time?
Well, to improve those skill sets as well is something around mentorship. I mean, that's equally important to be able to do that. And I think that's something that is lacking in a massive way in our country. I mean, how important is it to have a mentor? Did you have a mentor at the start of your career? And maybe more important, do you still have a mentor, Koshiek? Because, we have conversations at home about anything, and it's very rare that you'll get that person slip in saying that they were talking to their mentor the other day. But you speak to your international friends, and it seems like it's the standard. You should have a mentor with each step of the way, and you feel like it's something that you just wish was more of a cultural norm here.
No, 100%, Mops. I mean, look, I've been gifted with really brilliant mentors, and it's a massive reason why, I invest so much time and energy paying it forward. And I think early on, the temptation going into a new career is to find a really senior mentor, a chief executive, someone who sits on the board of directors. And, you look at people at very commanding leadership roles. The problem with that, Mops, is that they don't actually understand what you're going through. And their lived experiences are sometimes 15, 20 years old. And the world's changed. And I think, in a corporate environment, there's so many people that want to help you. But the best people, in my experience, to help you are maybe 1 or 2 brackets more senior than you are. Because they've learned, they've got burns, they've made mistakes, they want to share what actually works. So also remember that not all environments and not all advice is good advice, right? Because ultimately, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt and make sure the advice that you get from mentors is tailored and is bespoke to your situation. Yeah. I mean, Mops, you can, progress through the organization in a corporate because, you walked around in a muscle t-shirt. Yeah. It's probably not going to work out for everyone, right? Maybe other people need to take cupcakes to work on a Friday or, buy everyone drinks. So, different approaches work.
Yeah, and that actually links in quite beautifully with my next question, which is around networking. I mean, how do you build relationships in this current time that we're in right now? You try to build a relationship in the virtual work from home, Zoom meeting, you're on mute, crazy COVID-19 world we find ourselves in. I've got a couple of friends who've just started new positions, and it's like, how do you actually even strike that relationship when everything is currently virtual?
So I think, one of the best foolproof methods to virtual networking, Mops, is set up a meeting and, pull out a bottle of the best whiskey you can find as a junior employee. And then you start, sharing details of your past relationships with all of your colleagues. So generally, I think that's a pretty good start. But if you don't want to do that, and you think I'm giving you bad advice, which is ridiculous, I'll never do it.
Yeah.
Just reach out to people and ask them how they're feeling. And sometimes it's as easy as sharing a work from home meme, and not being rigid. Just asking people. Hey, are you missing the office? How are you feeling? Do you want to catch up? And always do those check-ins, because sometimes you got to be brave and put yourself out there and ask people that you don't often speak to, unless it's a work call, to say, hey, how long have you been with business? Or I noticed that you support this football team. Or I noticed you are wearing this item of clothing. And strike up that conversation virtually, hang on the call a couple of minutes after everyone leaves. And that's how you kind of build rapport virtually.
Mm. That's pretty good advice. And I think there's also many other ways of going about it. But I think it's probably just really framing the fact that try to figure out how you can go the extra mile and take a little bit more of a personable approach. Okay, so we've covered quite a bit in this regard. And now you have this new job. It's an extraordinary new world for you. And what are the secret tools or hacks that you think you can use? And I think this one is like a really, really considered one to think about, because it's something that we might have to really emphasize for people to be able to take away from a lot of what you've said.
100%, Bobs. And, I'm happy to put together more of a detailed guide around this, because, I feel this is something that merits a lot more than a 20-second answer or conversation between you and I. And I think, having a secret toolkit and hacks for jobs that haven't actually been developed yet. You're training for something, going into war with the unknown. And I think it's just so important at a high level to build skills that are resilient, versatile, adaptable, and they have longevity. In a nutshell, that's ideally the skill and tool set that you develop.
No, absolutely. Really, really good advice there. So we've obviously been having quite a few people asking questions. If you still want to keep asking those questions, please be sure to put them in the chat. We've got people who asked questions before we started the conversation, and they've been sending them in over the week. We're obviously going to try and cover as many as possible. But I think, if you don't mind, I'd love to get started with our Q&A, Koshiek, and see what you can assist people with what seems to be pressing issues for them right now. So for all those that are tuned in, let's get to those burning questions. And some of you, as I said, submitted those questions before the event, and others have put them in the chat. And let's see if you can answer this one from Deshni. Let me just quickly pull it up over here. Deshni asks, what are the ways of protecting your wealth or building wealth during the current economic crisis? What are the ways of protecting your wealth and building your wealth during the current economic crisis? A very, very important question. I think that it's concerning everyone right now.
100%, Bobs. Look, I think the first step is to protect what you have, right? And I think where there's chaos, there's opportunities. There's gaps and opportunities all around us. Right now, you look around, there's empty storefronts, vacant shopping malls, abandoned hotels. And you got to ask yourself, will it be this way 18 months from now? And if there's one lesson from really successful investors and people who have, made a fortune out of distress situations, is they're able to see opportunities where other people can't. And right now it's really gloomy. We're inundated with bad news, and it just feels like the world is collapsing on us and it's coming to an end. But you know what? The world is not coming to an end, right? I mean, look, I don't know what's in the vaccines, Maps. Maybe I'll develop superpowers, and life will be different in 2 years from now. But in a nutshell, the world's not coming to an end. You got to prepare for that. And you just got to make sure when the world does turn around, and when those jobs do come to market, and when there are vacancies, and when recruiters are calling you up, your CV's updated, your skill sets are polished, and you've practiced enough to be ready. Because ultimately, luck is when preparation meets opportunity, right? You got to be prepared, because those opportunities are going to come.
Absolutely. Preparation. If you had to try put your neck on the line there, Koshiek, and I had to ask you when you think we'll start to see things turn around a bit, if you had to dip into your inner Nostradamus and tell us what you think is going to happen next, What would your thoughts be on that?
I think, Bobs, we're already seeing a turnaround in a couple of sectors. I think as the lockdown eases up, we're going to see a lot less pressure on hospitality, hotels, hopefully, office and residential properties. We're also seeing the consumer tick back or come back slowly. It's still early signs. You don't want to call it prematurely, but there's many sectors in South Africa that are really resilient. Without getting into the technicals, if you looked at the sell-off at the peak or height of COVID, when it just exploded onto our shores, that sell-off was so unjustified, Mops. And I think anyone who even rolled the dice on the South Africa or the economy, they would have made so much money since then, right? It's ridiculous. And it actually shows you that people tend to panic and fear a lot more than they should. Yes, you should panic, but I think a lot of the fear was really, really overblown, and we're actually seeing that now. And I think in the next 6, 12, 18 months, we're going to look back on this period and think, I should have bought that stock. I'm kicking myself,
Yeah, absolutely. And you hear quite often at the start of the last couple of years of how bad things are going to be in terms of our exchange rates and everything. And we have this kind of resilience. And obviously our economy isn't looking fantastic right now, but somehow we manage to push through each time. We have a question from Esther. Esther asks, if your first job is a fixed 2-year internship, after which you don't know whether you'll secure permanent employment, how can you best use the money you make in those 2 years so that it can take care of you if permanent employment doesn't happen or while you look for employment elsewhere? Bit of a mouthful there, but
No, I got the question, Bob. So 100%, we tight. Okay, look, I think Esther's asked a good question here. And I think after the first year, you're going to have those conversations. You don't have a conversation around your contract 1 year, 11 months into a 2-year contract, right?
Yeah.
That's risky. And it takes time, especially in this market. It takes such a long time for you to actually go out there and set yourself up for, your next opportunity. And especially as a young professional, when you get the contract, you may feel like there's these invisible handcuffs on you. But it's actually really common for other companies to go out there and buy out your contracts and be open about it. Now, you got to be delicate and handle it very sensitively because you don't want to betray the trust of the organization that has a contract with you. But if you open with their Mops and you say, listen, I'm not sure of my future right now. Either you give me a bit of comfort here, or I would like you to know respectfully that I'm going to have conversations that open me up for the next chapter, and be mature about it. At the end of the day, you have to take ownership of your own career because there's no one in that building that's going to do it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to be self-reliant in that way. And also, you're not going to get any of that advice kind of elsewhere, but within yourself. And I mean, this is a bit of a side note segue. Looking for that advice can be dangerous where you search as well. I mean, I think about the advice you have to deal with all the time on social media, on Twitter, particularly when people kind of come on as experts, and that's something you're supposed to take seriously. But you really are being given bad information. Recently, in fact, last week, I saw you having to engage with someone who was speaking about the fact that you should just never rent at all. You should rather save that money for the next 5 years so that you can build your land and buy a mansion and start this amazing life. But that makes absolutely no logical sense in itself, and you have to be able to decipher through the stuff that some people spew out as well.
And let's play that out, Buffs, because I think many people on the webcast are also in the situation where they're currently thinking about, should I rent or should I buy?
Yeah,
right? Such an important conversation. So what happens if you decide to save up all your cash for 2 years and then go out and buy a property, like the person posted on Twitter? You and I saw the same tweet. So for the next 2 years, Bobs, I'm going to live in a cardboard box under a bridge, right? Yeah. And the air conditioning is just going to be the wind from and inclement weather, right? That's going to make a fire instead of a big appliance or whatever it is. But listen, you can't the thing is, you need to live and you need to make a decision right now. And many places, when you rent a place, needs 1 month deposit or 2 months deposit. That's a significant cash outflow for someone that's starting out their career. So, when it comes to renting, when it comes to making a decision between renting and buying, there's a couple of tips I can share with you, Mops, for what to look for and what to do. The first thing is stress test your budget. And what I mean by that is, if your rent is going to be 8K a month, ask yourself if you can afford the rent at 9K a month. Similarly, if you want to buy a house, let's get into buying a house next, but let's focus first on renting. Ask yourself if you can spend 9K a month. Then ask yourself whether or not it makes sense for you to share a flat or an apartment early on. All right. I can tell you horror stories about, sharing apartments in res and in digs, and I'm sure you've lived with people, Mops. You know that there's an upside and there's a downside to it. You're laughing about it, but I know you're getting flashbacks. But ask yourself, what's the best option for me to rent? Is it safe? Is it secure? Can I afford the rental escalation? Is it close to work? Is it furnished, unfurnished? Little things that you don't think are important, but they're really, really important. Then if you're looking to buy a house, Mops, what's so important is to understand that when you buy a house, that bond repayment is not the only cost that goes off your account. There's levies, there's rates, there's maintenance, there's utilities, there's running costs. And all of those add up so quickly, Mops, that if you spending 8K a month, for example, on your mortgage or your home loan, eventually you can find that the net outlay is like more towards 11, 12, 13K, 1.5 times that. And it's so easy when a bank phones you up and says, hey, you qualify for a home loan, take it up. But in this day and age where people are remote working, they're flexible, they want to have a bit of free cash, I always recommend that you really look at all of the costs of home ownership. And in many cases, Mops, especially in big metropolitan areas, for the most part, it really makes sense for you to rent and free up that cash.
Absolutely. And honestly, it's really, really important to know what all the costs are coming in, because you strike such a good point about even things just such as levies and how those won't be set. Those will fluctuate as well, depending on, perhaps if you're living in an apartment setting, the usage of other people, and if it's winter and if it's summer, and you have to budget for all those things, and it could be $2,000 more, or a little, in different ways, or a little bit less. And it's really important to know that there will be that window, and there'll be issues where you happen to come into this new place where they need to renovate the whole place. So there's an added levy because everyone needs to contribute. So you need to be able to know exactly what you might have to face when it comes
to special levies, Mops. And you look at the special levy sometimes, and I know we're sounding like, two 65-year-old men who complain about, the weather every day. We're grouchy. But let's talk about special levies, Mops. I mean, if you've never paid a special levy before, it's basically, a once-off cost for, replacing the gate at the front of the complex, or doing a new paint job, or doing some sort of maintenance that's unforeseen. And those special levies, as you just mentioned, Bobs, they can hurt you because nobody prepares for them.
And I think it takes us back to our earlier questions of, really just focus on what you need, what makes the most sense for your lifestyle, so that you can live within your means in every sense of the word. We have another question here from Kabelo, and Kabelo asks, what if you try and get into a specific market and just can't get that opportunity for that first door to open? What can you do?
Sure, Mops, you take any door, right? And, again, this ties back to the instantaneous gratification culture, where we see graduates with really good jobs and young professionals with highly paid careers. But the truth is, we tend to wait for perfect, but the perfect moment and the perfect time to start a diet, start gym, get that perfect job, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right? Perfect doesn't exist. So you just start. You take a junior role with the potential to move up. And what's funny? It's easier to move to your dream role when you're within an organization than it is from the outside. Right? If you want to break into that perfect role, the best thing you can do, if you can't get it, is to get into a role parallel or more junior to it and work your way into it from the inside. And many companies hire people from the inside before they hire people from the outside.
Mm. And how do you change that attitude mindset though? Because I find with a lot of the emails I may get, and I'm sure you get a ton of them as well, people who are wanting to enter a certain industry kind of also aren't really willing to do whatever it takes for that door to open in terms of putting in those extra yards. It's always kind of looking for that shortcut and seeing how you can get there as quickly as possible. And I know sometimes it's out of desperation, but how do you handle the Koshiek, I'm so and so, and I need to be doing this. Tell me how I do it.
The best thing you can do is think about it from Koshiek or Maps' perspective, right? As us being the guys who get these emails. What is it that we are looking for? And how can you add value to our lives day one? I mean, Maps, you're right. You get 1,000 different CVs or emails. Why should you roll the dice on one of those more than anyone else, right? And more importantly, there are no shortcuts. It's just not a sexy thing to say because I wish I could, give you the secret game plan that, doubles your money in 3 days and, sold you off to like a Ponzi scheme that has all the answers. But whether it's a financial investment, whether it's an investment in yourself, or whether it's an investment in your broader career, there's just no shortcut, Mobs. There are no shortcuts. There's no easy way out. And I think, especially now, you raise a good point about people being desperate. You should never pay people to take your CV. You should never pay for interviews. You should never be in a situation where you're giving up something for recruitment. It's a real big problem in South Africa where, people, because they're desperate, they tend to get exploited by unscrupulous people that collect their money into these sham investments, collect their CVs into sham recruitment. And I think, as far as possible, you want to make sure you protect yourself when it comes to those type of decisions.
Yeah, there's always vultures waiting in the shadows to take full advantage of you. Koshiek, I'm getting kind of sad that we have kind of reaching that point, but you've given a lot of incredible advice, so I really, really appreciate that, man.
I think, Mops, we are running out of time, but there's one question that, and it ties into a lot of the conversations you and I have around this stuff, around what it's like being your own boss, and, people on the webcast as well as myself have followed your journey through, you in the leisure, the entertainment business, you're a man of many talents, right? And how do you run being your own boss? Let's talk about that.
I got nervous as realizing that you're about to flip the questions on to me. It's been an interesting challenge, and you learn so much. I've been fortunate that, in many sense of the word, I've been my own boss for a while now, but also been an employee. And I think it's an interesting transition because you go from that stability of someone just handling everything else while you just do that one thing that is required of you, or kind of that one role that is required of you. And then when you become the boss, it ends up being a complete change of approach, because now it's requiring you to be able to know the entire value chain of your business, and you are the one who is now needing to pull all these different strings within your business for it to work. There is no kind of safety per se. There's no safety net and stability. You're the one who needs to be able to make the tough decisions, the tough calls, and the tough possible, really decisions that will lead you either to the next level or that will make you and your business fail. You also have so much more responsibility because now it's not just your job on the line. It's numerous other people's jobs on the line. It seems so glamorous to people to be your own boss, to be an entrepreneur, but they don't realize just how much goes into that. They don't realize how, when you're starting a business and when you are growing something, just how much responsibility and accountability needs to come with that. But also the difficulties of the hours go from essentially you needing to fulfill this set of hours as an employee to now there is no set of hours when you're your own boss. While you're trying to build a business to a certain level where you can start to have those hours because you have the luxury because it's doing really well. And that takes a really long time too. It requires a lot of patience. It requires you to be able to deal with many different people in different kinds of way and to be open to different issues, but always think of finding that balance of what's best both for the business and for your employees. So try to get a plan into place for that. You can only do the basics of planning that, but not everything goes to plan, and you and I both know that. And the challenges a lot of the time that you'll face will more than likely be those of people as a whole. And people are great. People are a great asset to your business, but they can also be a big challenge in the position of the boss. And that's people in all parts of the value chain. But it's also an exciting thing. It feels like you are pushing yourself. You're pushing. Not every day is the same, and you now are requiring yourself to dig a lot deeper every single day to be able to create something great. So it's not for the faint-hearted, but definitely feeling fortunate to be in a position where I can do that and to be a part of a very big South African problem, to be a solution of that big South African problem, which is unemployment. And that's probably the most grateful part I am of it all.
Maps, I think that's extremely valuable, and thank you, for sharing with us, your journey through it. I think being an entrepreneur is a tough gig, man. Yeah. I mean, there's so many ups and downs, but as you said, there's this reward from building something.
Yeah.
That it's an intangible, and I would strongly urge everyone on the webcast to go out and try and sell something.
Yeah.
Build something. Just build something. It doesn't even need to make money. Just go out there and build something. And it's so empowering because it gives you the sense of purpose. Yeah. And, if there's one thing we can leave, the audience with at Curveball, it's just step outside your comfort zone.
Yeah. But also be patient with that because these things take time and it's going to require that risk, but it's not going to happen overnight. And also take it in stages. Do what you're doing now is an enabler. Don't leave that. Find that stability so that you can continue to be enabled to build these things, because it's also not easy to do that overnight. Koshiek, thank you so much. We're out of time. Thank you for joining Curveball. To everyone that is watching us, we'll see you all at Ahead of the Curve. And don't forget to check out Ahead of the Curve website for this full conversation next week. And while you're there, hit subscribe for Investec's newsletter for young professionals. Koshiek, thank you so much for your time, man.
Thank you so much, Maps. Thank you, everyone, for joining.